Snorlax is the most divisive deck in the Pokemon trading card game. It has a different playstyle where instead of trying to attack and take 6 prizes, it just wants to prevent its opponents from attacking until they run out of cards. And some people love that playstyle, some people hate that playstyle, but it is a valid playstyle that has done incredibly well in recent months. And today, we are going to look at how this deck fares post-rotation. I'm Jeff from InThirdPerson.com. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let's check out a tier list and some deck lists from Japan. The overall strategy of Snorlax is to outlast your opponent. You want to trap Pokemon in the active of theirs that can't attack and rely on that block ability so that they can't get that Pokemon out. Of course, that gets blown up by switch cards, but a lot of decks run very few switch cards. And for decks that aren't running a lot of switch cards, you can just get stuck in a position where you cannot win the game any longer, which is a very tough way to go out. But Snorlax is just kind of taking advantage of the meta where a lot of decks just don't run many, if any, switch cards. And some variations of the deck do have the ability to attack. Most of the time, you're really just trying to stall out your opponent, but there are instances where you want to attack, or if you're like really late into finals and the final game has to be determined by number of prizes, you might want to sneak in an attack or two in order to get the upper hand. But generally speaking, you're trying to force your opponent to run out of cards before you do. The million-dollar question, does it survive rotation? Yes. Now, as you can see on the latest tier list from Pokeka Book, it is probably a little lower on the tier list than where we would have it in the tier list. I guess 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's still like in the top 10. So maybe it's still in the same place where we would put it now, but it has kind of lost ground to certain other decks. I mean, Charizard is still the runaway favorite, though I'd imagine that Snorlax still has a great matchup against Charizard going forward. Lost Box moving up is kind of a problem because Lost Box runs a billion switch cards. We do see the Future Box on the rise. I wonder if this is going to get split because there's a variation of the Future Box with just Iron Hands and Iron Crown that is doing really well. So I would imagine that's going to be split of just Iron Hands, Iron Crown plus Future Box as separate entries on this list going forward. Lugia is on the rise because of Minccino or Cinccino. Chen Pao actually slipping a little bit here. This was the number 2 deck for a while, and now it's kind of slipped to the 5th deck on the list. And then, yeah, Arctina has been doing very well. Roaring Moon actually moving up here a little bit, and Giratina Lawson down here in the B tier as well. So still a number of decks that are in the top mix and that are above Snorlax, but Snorlax definitely still something to consider, and definitely still a threat. It's still so much of a threat that at the first Champions League in Japan's post-rotation format, it got 2 of the top 16 spots, including a 3rd place finish from Tatsuyoshi Kosho. So we are actually going to look at that list in just a sec. Snorlax actually loses a bunch of cards in rotation. Battle VIP Pass is one of them. It helps get those basic Pokemon down on the first turn. However, Snorlax only ran 1 Battle VIP Pass anyway for the most part, so this isn't that big of a deal. We are losing Peonia though, which is kind of annoying for Snorlax because it lets you grab cards from your prize cards and trade with cards in your hand, and there are going to be times you're going to trap some key resources in your prizes that at this point in time you can't grab back anymore. We are losing Crabominable, but really we were just using this for the mill effect, and we kind of started to move over to Chi-Yu. Echoing Horn is going away, but we do have sort of a substitution for that. Avery is going away, and that was great at forcing your opponent's bench down to 3 while also drawing cards for yourself. And then Sydney lets you discard up to Pokemon, or like up to 2 Pokemon tool cards and special energy cards from your opponent's hand. And that does kind of suck. We do have a substitution of sorts for that, but it's not quite the same thing. Hero's Cape gives Pokemon 100 HP extra, no strings attached. We don't have to worry about dropping an extra prize like Luxurious Cape, and this is going to be huge, upping Snorlax's HP up to 250, making it very difficult for many decks to one-shot, especially when you consider that we could penny for Snorlax back and heal off that damage and then get another Snorlax for 250 HP. This becomes absolutely brutal. Aries, an amazing card for Snorlax. It lets you look at your opponent's hand, choose 2 item cards you find there, and discard them. This is going to be a way of getting rid of those switch cards out of your opponent's hand. Also gives you some information on what cards they're holding to give you a better idea of what you can play next. This first example comes from that Champions League. Shoutouts to Tatsuyoshi Kosho for this list. We're going to go through this one a little slower to kind of give the overview on how the deck works, and then for the remaining lists, we'll go through it a little faster and just focus on the differences. So we're going to start with the Pokemon. We have Snorlax with its block ability to prevent our opponents from retreating. Rotom helps us draw cards. Pidgeot has 2 purposes here. It's a V-based Pokemon, so we can use it to grab Forest Seal Stone. Well, we can attach Forest Seal Stone to it so that we can grab a card of our choice. And on top of that, it has an ability that lets us go from the bench to the deck, which prevents our deck from decking out. Chi-Yu can help us mill cards with that Jealousy Singe attack, and then Mimikyu prevents damage from Pokemon EX and Pokemon V. From there, we have a ton of trainer cards. Maybe not going to go through all of these. I'll just kind of point out some of the key ones that are specific to the Snorlax strategy. For example, Penny helps us scoop a Pokemon out of the board, and then we just get it back into our hand. So for example, a Snorlax with the Hero's Cape gets damaged. We can actually scoop it up with Penny, put a new Snorlax in the active, and then put that cape from our hand back onto a Snorlax, and just negating the last attack, which is pretty deadly. Airy and Misfortune Sisters helps us discard items. Aries from the hand, Misfortune Sisters is from the deck. Erica's Invitation is a really nasty gusting option where you get to look at your opponent's hand, pick a basic Pokemon out of their hand, they have to play it on their bench and then move it to the active, which is nuts because you can trap some Pokemon that your opponent really don't want to put into the active, and now it's there and they're going to have to deal with it. Silene is great. You get to flip 2 coins, and for each heads you get to put a card from your discard pile to the top of your deck. So it's a great way of looping your resources. Team Yell's Cheer is another way of looping your resources. Lets you grab Pokemon or supporter cards from your deck and then put them back into, or from your discard pile and put them back into your deck. Counter Catcher is such a huge card in this deck. Once you fall behind on prizes, you can use Counter Catcher to just continually gust up support Pokemon and Pokemon that your opponent doesn't want in the active. And then any other options, here are other cards that we need to focus on. Any sort of HP boosts like Bravery Charm, Defiance Best, and Hero's Cape make your Snorlaxes even tankier. And then Temple of Sinnoh helps to negate special energies. So in particular, stuff like Jet Energy, which can be used as a switch out. Temple of Sinnoh just shuts those down. The second example is very similar to the first one, but the big change here is the inclusion of Mantine. Now, Mantine is a Pokemon we saw in Astral Radiance, and it has the cool attack Born Ashore. For 1 colorless energy, you put a basic Pokemon from either player's discard pile onto that player's bench, and this is going to be your way of benching a basic Pokemon from your opponent's discard pile into the active for you to then gust later and trap in the active. So really nasty way of messing up your opponent's board state. Lure Module is a very cool stadium in this particular deck. It forces both players to look at the top 3 cards of each of their decks and then put all Pokemon they find there into their hand and then shuffle the rest back into their deck. When you combo this with Erica's Invitation, there's a higher chance that you are going to grab a Pokemon with Erica that your opponent did not want in the game at all, and now it's stuck in the active. Geocomo makes an appearance in this deck where it lets you discard a special energy from each of your opponent's Pokemon. This is particularly devastating for decks that rely on special energy, like Arceus Giratina, like Giratina Lost Zone with all of the jet energies, and Lugia as well, where Lugia is fighting entirely with special energy. Example 3 features our first look at an attacker in the Snorlax deck, and that is Radiant Charizard, where its attack is powered up by Excited Heart. So the ability is when your opponent takes more prizes, the colorless cost comes down, and if your opponent's taken 4 prizes, you can attack for just 1 fire energy. And the Combustion Blast attack does 250 damage, and we have 2 energy in the deck, so once they've taken 3 prizes, we can put 2 energy on this Charizard to attack if need be. There are some situations where Snorlax wants to attack, in particular in certain matchups in the late game where if time's running out and it's going to go to prizes, like Snorlax is kind of screwed if you can't take prizes. So Radiant Charizard here to get in some big attacks towards the late game and potentially steal wins here and there. Also can be used to take out some big components of your opponent's deck if they're trying to you could take out their main attacker or their main support Pokemon and then eventually get back to your stalling tactics. So Radiant Charizard, kind of helpful here. One more list today, and this one's the most teched out in terms of Pokemon. We have the appearance of a Pidgeot EX, and this is great because its quick search ability lets you grab any card from the deck and put it into your hand, helping this deck's consistency, and its attack is not bad as well. Blustery Wind for 2 colorless energy does 120 damage, and you can discard a Stadium in play. Also helping out here is Mist Energy, where you can put this on your Snorlax or on your Pidgeot, and it will not succumb to effects of attacks. So something like Sableye Lost Mine or Giratina V-Star Star Requiem or Roaring Moon's Frenzied Gouging, you will just not get knocked out by those effects of attacks because Mist Energy is there. We also see Sharon's Care in the list. This is kind of an alternative to Penny. You can use this to scoop up Snorlax, but it also works on Pidgeot as well because this works on colorless Pokemon, and you also get to keep the attached cards as well, unlike Professor Turo's scenario where you have to discard everything, or with Penny. Actually, Penny gets you everything, but this is for colorless Pokemon, and you can grab evolution colorless Pokemon, so this helps you save the Pidgeot as well. Last but not least, we have a appearance of Mawile here with that tempting trap attack where during your opponent's next turn the defending Pokemon can't retreat. Also, the defending Pokemon takes 90 more damage from attacks, but the big thing here is that your opponent can't retreat, so you can trap something into the active and just stall them out that way if the Snorlax doesn't work out. So you've got more ways of being able to lock your opponent down. And there we go. That wraps up our look at the Snorlax stall deck. It doesn't really change too much. However, it also kind of doesn't change too much on the tier list. It looks like it's still going to be super annoying while also being super competitive, and for some people that's going to be a big problem. I personally don't like playing this deck. I don't like fighting against this deck, but it is a valid way to play, and we just have to be as prepared for it as we think we need to be. Certain decks are inherently built to blow this up. Like if you're playing, say, an Iron Valiant deck where you're running 1 billion switch cards, you're going to be just fine. But for everybody else, you're either trying to take it on with the tools that you have or just kind of accepting it's an auto loss. And that's actually an important thing to note as well, is that when you're building a deck, your goal is to try and make it as consistent as possible, lean into its strengths, and you can only tech a deck so far. You are not going to be able to optimize your deck to beat every single possible matchup in the game. And it's okay if your deck auto loses in certain matchups. The important thing is if you can't auto lose to whatever the most popular matchup is. If Snorlax is the best deck in the game and the most popular deck in the game, absolutely tech for it. But if it's something you think you're only going to run into once in a blue moon or not enough to warrant making your deck worse just to be better in this one matchup, then stick with consistency. But for now, I gotta get going. Oh man, my voice is so bad right now. Thank you so much for watching. You can find me on all the things: YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram at In Third Person. You can find me on Twitch at In Third Person, where I usually stream the Pokemon trading card game every Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. But due to health stuff, I've been sick in these videos for like the last 3 weeks. It's crazy. The stream's going on hiatus for a bit, but I will be back, hopefully, fingers crossed, on March 17th, hopefully 100%, and we will send off the final pre-rotation era of the game in style. And check out the website, inthirdperson.com, for more articles and videos on video games, board games, and other nerdy pursuits. So until the next one, I'll see you later. Bye-bye.